Upon hearing the bishop's instructions, Leonard was first taken aback before he inwardly sighed. Mr. Fool's prophecy was really accurate. No, it's not a prophecy. He was already aware of everything. Leonard quickly reined in his thoughts and followed the procedures to get Bishop St. Anthony to give him an official document. Then, he returned underground and brought 2 members into Cheney's Gate. After waiting for the keepers to check the documents, he came to Emlyn White's room, which was illuminated with shining silver candles that were covered with engraved patterns. He opened the heavy stone door with a brass key. Ghostly blue light entered the cell, stabbing Emlyn White's eyes to the point of him instinctively closing his eyes. His face was much paler than before, and his body was much thinner. He exuded a feeling that a gust of wind would lift him up at any moment. Thinking of Mr. Fool's answer, Emlyn suddenly felt confident in his current situation. Without opening his eyes, he slowly stood up and chuckled. "I knew you would take the initiative to send me out. Would you be disappointed if I said that it was just a routine investigation?" Leonard lampooned inwardly and replied without any expression, "I'll give you 30 seconds. If you don't leave Cheney's Gate within this period, I'll take it as you voluntarily choosing to stay behind." As a slightly more senior Nighthawk and a captain of a Red Gloves team for several months, Leonard had rich experience in dealing with prisoners. Emlyn's expression froze. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but he ultimately maintained his silence. He walked past Leonard and his 2 teammates and walked out of Cheney's Gate. Outside, he suddenly shuddered, as if he wanted to purge the chill in his body. "Once you return, getting some sunlight would fix you up." "Oh, the sun is a rare commodity in Backland's winter, and you vampires don't enjoy sunbathing. Aren't you an apothecary? You can concoct some medicine from the sun domain yourself." Seeing this, Leonard casually reminded him. Emlyn's condition wasn't the best. On the one hand, he hadn't drunk any spirituality-containing human blood for days. He could only rely on the blood of animals as a substitute. On the other hand, it was because he had stayed behind Cheney's Gate for too long. The power of Evernight that supported the seal had eaten into him a little, making him require the effects of medicine from the sun domain to remove the residual effects. As a potions professor, Emlyn was aware of his physical and mental condition. He didn't retort or nod. He only emphasized the word sanguine before asking, "Where's Father Yutravsky? He still needs to stay a little while longer. I hope this bloody war will end soon. Don't worry, we'll let him come out twice a week to get some sunlight. As for which days they'll be, it'll depend on the weather in Backland." Leonard gave a simple response before sending Emlyn White to the ground and onto the streets. Emlyn hesitated for a moment before asking again, "Where's the nearest hospital?" "What do you want to do?" Leonard asked in a professional manner. "Get a blood transfusion." Emlyn raised his chin slightly, trying his best not to change his expression. "Blood transfusion, more like drinking blood." Leonard didn't call him out. He pointed in one direction and gave him the address. After watching the sanguine Viscount leave, he returned underground and began to discuss a recent case with his team members. After several days of traveling, Klein finally arrived near the Noise City ruins in the north. This was equally a desolate plain. The dried riverbed left traces of itself on the ground. Looking at the dark, shadowy city that was filled with a thin fog, he was in no hurry to get close. Instead, he found a hidden spot and muttered the honorific name of Mr. Fool. Following that, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and recited the incantation before entering the world above the grey fog. To return to Sapphira Castle with just a thought, he needed the prayers of the Tarot Club members to stack together, forming a strong and firm anchor. That way, it would provide the Fool with the sufficient summoning power. With the help of the prayer light, Klein used his true vision to check the situation of the Noise ruins from afar. He discovered that the thin fog was slowly dissipating, but it couldn't completely dissipate. On the surface of the city, there wasn't a single spirit body thread. The people who were dressed in linen robes or animal hides were lying in different spots on the streets. They weren't as lively and busy as the time the City of Silver's expedition team visited. After the angel or sealed artifact that occupied this city discovered that their whereabouts were exposed, they chose to migrate. As Klein made a guess based on the situation in front of him, he retracted his gaze and looked at the grayish-white fog that held up Sapphira Castle. He was trying to prevent the miracle invoker, or attendant of mysteries, or the corresponding sealed artifact from hiding in the historical void and ambushing the Beyonders of the ancient Noise City. He didn't wish to directly encounter a cluster of translucent maggots that twisted into a huge vortex when he leaped into the fog of history, nor did he wish to be pursued by those terrifying tentacles. The ambush that Zeradal had laid for him still left Klein feeling a lingering sense of fear. From time to time, he would have nightmares, hoping to seek Miss Justice for another round of treatment for psychological trauma. This stimulus was worse than seeing his marionette, Anuni, wear a monocle in front of him while his body remained completely immobile. This was because he had implicated the Hounds of Fulgrim. After confirming that the historical void was safe, Klein returned to the real world. He stretched out his hand, grabbed, and pulled out his former self. This former self was also wearing a silk half-top hat, a black trench coat, and holding a simple glass lantern. In the next second, he jumped into the grayish-white fog and followed the illuminated spots in the historical void, running all the way to a period before the first epoch, in that city of a long-dead civilization. To him, this was a very ingenious, safe house. This was because, aside from him, no scholar of yore could trace back to this lost piece of history. Of course, to him, coming all the way here had required him to expend a lot of his spirituality. He could only stay there for another 15 minutes at most, and that was only if he didn't make any burdening attempts at summoning historical void projections. After hiding his true body, Klein's projection in the real world moved forward, quickly arriving outside the noise ruins. He didn't blindly approach or enter. After circling to a small mound opposite the dried riverbed, he raised his right hand and summoned his original marionette, the cold Earl of the fallen Konas Kilgore with dark blue eyes. Konas's body squirmed and instantly transformed into Gehrman Sparrow. Then, he reached out and took out a lantern from the historical void. The historical projection who summoned a historical projection had disordered the distance under the dim yellow light of the lantern. In a few steps, he arrived outside Noise City, alone. With the lantern in hand, he passed through the rotting buildings and passed through the thin fog before entering the ruins. Compared to using his true vision above the gray fog, actual contact made him discover more details. The humans and monsters lying in different spots had signs of decay, as though they had been abandoned for some time. Some of them sat on chairs under the eaves of the house, others slumped beside stoves. Some held moldy bread while others held hands. There were some leaning against the walls and sitting on the ground, their lips pressed against a bone flute. This allowed Klein to imagine the situation in the city back when they were living. Some of them were slacking off and resting. Some were baking food, and others were shopping along the streets. Others were focused on music as some came and went, laughing non-stop. There were also others fighting monsters in an arena. This was such a lively and bustling scene, but in reality, everyone had already died and were no longer in possession of their souls. They were only repeating predetermined actions. And one day, this strange scene froze with time, and everyone collapsed without any warning. A city formed by marionettes, the most realistic theater. Back then, the foggy town was in a similar situation. Although I'm also a seer, I still have to say that, in terms of horror, terror, and bizarreness, our pathway is definitely ranked amongst the top 3. Could it be that I'll be acting in the same manner in the future? Attendant of mysteries. With the lantern in hand, Klein walked through the streets that were littered with corpses. He followed his spiritual intuition and headed for the ancient Noise City center. The situation here made him believe that the person who had once ruled the Noise ruins definitely had enough intelligence. After the City of Silver's expedition team broke the peace and serenity here, the entity didn't choose to kill or destroy any clues. Instead, this place was abandoned without hesitation before the entity migrated elsewhere. The reason why the City of Silver wasn't silenced probably had to do with an Amon parasite following behind. Yes, it could also be because of the true creator. As he casually let his thoughts wander, Klein quickly arrived at a relatively intact cathedral. Inside the cathedral stood a statue of a demonic wolf with 8 legs. It was covered with short and dark hair. There was a tuft of grayish-white fur at the top of the statue head. Its pitch-black pupils covered at least 3/4 of its eyes. It's not Phlegria. The dark demonic wolf that occasionally appeared in the Third Epoch, the god of wishes. He has been in the forsaken land of the gods for thousands of years and has finally found that sequence 1 beyonder characteristic. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, Klein suddenly heard footsteps coming, resounding one after another. Standing sideways, he immediately cast his gaze outside the cathedral. He saw a figure slowly walking through the thin fog before its outline quickly formed. He was nearly 2-3 meters tall, with a slight hunch to his back. With grizzled hair, wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, and a scar at the corners of his mouth, he looked like an old priest or bishop while donning a long black clergyman's robe. His dark brown eyes were calm, unlike the monsters deep in the darkness who were bloodthirsty and zero intelligence. However, in the long, quiet night of low-frequency lightning, this clergyman didn't carry any animal hide lanterns or have any fire lit. He just quietly walked through the thin fog. Although it had been less than a week since he entered the forsaken land of the gods, Klein had long gotten a good understanding of the place through Little Sunday. He knew that normal humans, even saints, had to use fire to create light in the darkness. Otherwise, it was very easy for them to encounter dangerous monsters lurking in the depths of the darkness, or be secretly devoured, disappearing without a trace, never to be found again. And at that moment, the elderly clergyman wasn't carrying any animal hide lanterns. Instead, he passed through the fog in the darkness and slowly entered the cathedral that was illuminated by the dim yellow light. If it wasn't for his deep and calm eyes that didn't show any signs of madness, Klein's first reaction would have been that he had encountered a special monster. Of course, having a normal person's state of mind and being immersed in darkness were contradictory traits. Any living creature with any semblance of normal intelligence could easily come up with a conclusion that this person might be even more terrifying than special monsters. Klein had only met one person who could pass through the darkness without being affected by it while having sufficient intelligence, blasphemer Amon. Sensing that the faint yellow light was reflected on his face, the tall black-robed clergyman with a slight hunch to his back stopped in his tracks. Looking at the demonic wolf statue, he hoarsely asked, "Where did the owner of this city go?" Klein was the kind of person who would try his best to resolve a problem peacefully if a fight with a stranger could be avoided. As he raised his guard, he calmly replied, "I don't know where either, I just entered the city, who knows where the owner went." Just as he said that, the entire cathedral dimmed. A thin fog surged in like a tidal wave from the outside, drowning the interior. The lantern in Klein's hand failed miserably at illuminating the windows and the situation at the door. It was dark outside, and nothing could be seen. In the blink of an eye, the cathedral that worshipped the demonic wolf statue seemed to be isolated from Noise City. It was unknown where it was located. Klein's pupils dilated slightly as he looked at the clergyman with wrinkles and white hair. He asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" The hunched clergyman replied in a condescending manner, "I'm an attendant by the Lord's side. I'm the angel of the Holy Word, Steph. I walk this land of the past that the Lord had passed on, doing so on his behalf in search of the blasphemer, hidden in the darkness." As he spoke, the elder's figure expanded to a height of 4 meters tall. Behind him, black illusory feathers appeared. Their shadows intersected and formed 4 pairs of gloomy but holy wings. Angel of the Holy Word, Steph. An attendant by the Lord's side. Land of the past. This is the blessed of the true Creator, the angel of faith subordinate, a member of the Rose Redemption. It's no wonder that he can walk in the darkness, he has the power of degeneration protecting him. That evil God is still searching for the beyonder characteristic of the attendant of mysteries. Klein had no choice but to raise his head and lock eyes with this clergyman who, despite wearing a black robe, had 4 pairs of angel wings on his back. This high-level existence angel's form remained wrinkled with grizzled hair. There was a sense of contradiction in everything about him. Pretending that he had never made an enemy of the Aurora Order, he calmly said, "That blasphemer has long fled. I'm also searching for him." After staring at Klein for 2 seconds, the angel of the Holy Word asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" It won't be convenient saying it out directly. Klein sighed and smiled. "I'm a lonely traveler." After he gave this reply, he suddenly felt an extreme sense of darkness developing within him. It then sank down and merged with the shadow created by the lantern. The pitch-black figure abruptly warped and came to life, stretching itself out to become another Gairman sparrow, one with sinister and ferocious eyes and a solitary demeanor. This. Klein's pupils constricted. Without any hesitation, he reached out his right hand and grabbed outward at thin air. At this point, if he hadn't guessed that Steph was using his answer, he should have joined the Aurora Order and made the true Creator his God. At this moment, he already knew what it meant by angel of the Holy Word. This was clearly the angel of the evil word. By using a person's reply, he could extract a portion of the ambiguity or expand on it to create the effect of spirit language. When Klein said that he didn't know where the owner of the city had gone, Steph extracted the words, "I don't know where I went," trapping himself and isolating himself from the outside world. When this angel revealed his identity, every word was enhancing his level and strength. When Klein answered who he was, it ended up separating a lonely traveler from him. From the moment he appeared in Noise City, there was a strong sense of malice in the black-robed Steph. And just as Klein was attempting to summon a particular image from the historical void, the sinister Gairman sparrow seemed to share the same thoughts as he did. He too grabbed at the same projection, cancelling each other out. Seeing that his powers as a scholar of yore had been restrained, Klein's eyes narrowed. Without any hesitation, he opened his mouth and said a word in Jotun. But in the next second, the word was stolen. Standing at about 4 meters tall, the stooped angel of the Holy Word, Steph, had at some point in time grown a head covered in blood on his left shoulder. It looked very similar to him, but was much younger, a person who was approximately in the 40s. Around the head were 2 skinless arms that had mangled flesh. They had grazed different souls and had used beyonder powers that could steal thoughts. At the same time, another bloody head grew on Steph's right shoulder, one that looked to be in his 20s. Amongst the 3 heads, one grazed souls and stole Klein's thoughts, while the other was staring coldly at the target, deepening the self-awareness of the lonely traveler. The last one opened his mouth and said, "You lie. You are the person who destroyed the Son of God's descent ritual and interfered with the Lord's descent twice. You are one of the targets I'm looking for." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he calmly said a word in Jotun, Leotaro. This was the true name of the Lord of Storms. The reason why this thought wasn't stolen was because he had lined up his subsequent actions. The lineup was filled with the same content. It didn't matter if the first thought was stolen, as it didn't affect the subsequent thoughts. This was a precious experience he had gained from fighting Amon. Of course, if he were to meet Amon again, he suspected that such a method might not work. Once the god of mischief was prepared, he would definitely come up with something new. As soon as he finished speaking, the eyes of the angel of the Holy Word angel, Steph, lit up with bolts of silver lightning. They covered the entirety of Noise City, and they tore through the darkness that enveloped the cathedral. They tore apart all the corruption, concealment, darkness, vileness, and evil. Inside, Klein and the sinister Gairman sparrow were situated at the eye of the lightning storm. Without even a grunt, they dissipated. Then, the terrifying, silvery white, twisted electric bolts snaked the area and swallowed the demonic wolf statue as well as the angel of holy words, Steph. Amidst the dull rumbling sounds, the ancient city of noise completely collapsed, becoming a true ruin. At the opposite side of the dried-up river bed, Klein's historical projection quickly faded away, returning to the real world. Right on the heels of that, Klein immediately used Flaming Jump to distance himself from the noise ruins. During this process, he pulled out a few paper figurines and made them into angels to cover his tracks. The desolate plains returned to its state of dead silence once again. After an unknown period of time, the ruins where the cathedral stood shook. Steph slowly stood up amidst crumbling dust and rock. His completely white hair had thinned again, and his deep black clergyman's robe became tattered. The angel of the holy word left Noi's ancient city in silence, got his bearings, and walked deep into the darkness. Half a day later, a figure approached the city's ruins from another direction. It was none other than Klein, who had made a huge detour. He hadn't had the chance to check the ancient city of Noise previously, and his return this time was motivated by the hope of finding actual clues of that existence. At a relatively far distance away, Klein repeated his observations above the gray fog, summoned the historical projection, and hid in ancient times, using the projection to summon another historical projection. After finishing his preparations, he stepped into Noise once again and returned to the cathedral in absolute silence. Along the way, the corpses that had been lying dead on the ground had either turned to ash or turned to charred remains, devoid of that creepy and harrowing feeling. That fellow named Steph didn't die. From the looks of it, the remnant divine powers of storm here can only injure an angel. Klein stopped in front of the ruined cathedral and muttered to himself wistfully. Of course, he only found it a little regretful. He didn't expect to finish off an angel so easily. As he swept his gaze, he saw a few pieces of the demonic wolf statue. The surface of it was dark black, and the insides were dark red, nothing like commonly seen stone. These stones must be extraordinary for them to be used by that dark demonic wolf for his statue. Furthermore, they don't look like something produced in the vicinity. Perhaps I can seek out the area the dark demonic wolf hid prior to Noise City by investigating them. As a miracle invoker, or even an attendant of mysteries, that dark demonic wolf must be good at covering his tracks. It'll be very difficult to track his whereabouts directly, but if I can find most of the areas he had hit previously, I should be able to gain insight into his habits and style. Once I know a person's past, I can predict his future. As he thought, he took 2 steps forward, bent down, and attempted to pick up a fragment of the statue. At that moment, a charred hand suddenly reached out and blocked his finger. From the corner of his eye, he saw a charred corpse standing up. The charred corpse's other hand held onto a crystal monocle and wore it on its left eye. Amon. Left eye. Klein's heart tightened at first before a strong sense of doubt and suspicion surfaced within him. In the next second, the charred corpse smiled and said, "Sorry, I wore it on the wrong side." As it spoke, it took off the monocle and moved it to its right eye. Once again, Klein understood why Amon was the god of mischief. At that moment, he didn't even have the desire to lampoon. All he wanted was to immediately end the historical projection and escape from the Amons, in front of him. The charred corpse that had been parasitized wiped the soot from its face. Before Klein disappeared, it said with a smile, "There's no rush. You are just a projection from the historical void. I can't really parasitize you, and you should know very well that I'm not alone. It's difficult for you to launch an effective counterattack." With a simple lantern in hand, Klein thought silently. He picked up a piece of the black sculpture fragment that had red insides, and he cautiously asked, "What exactly do you want to say?" At that moment, Amon had already changed back into his appearance. The only problem was that his skin remained darker. He adjusted his crystal monocle and chuckled. You know that I'm aware that you're searching for that dark demonic wolf in an attempt to obtain the miracle invoker's beyonder characteristic from him. I happen to be very interested as well. Why don't we play another game and see who can get to it first? What's the point of that? It's not like I won't pursue it or think of snatching it if I don't play this game. After 2 seconds of silence, he shook his head. I refuse. He had no intention of listening to what conditions Amon would offer. The more he heard from a top cheat, the more he would suffer. Amon shook his head without a hint of anger. You'll regret this. I had originally planned to use a miracle invoker's beyonder characteristic to exchange for Sapphira Castle with you, and also give you a period of time to transfer the secret gathering you organized. And now, I can only consider stealing your fate directly. I will carry the burden of the corrosion from the source. Yes, although it's dangerous, it's still thrilling enough. I'm already prepared to accept it and see who will eventually control the flow. With my father's experience, I believe I won't perform too poorly. What? Corrosion from the source? The experience of the ancient sun god? Klein originally didn't wish to continue discussing the topic of the miracle invoker beyonder characteristic and Sapphira Castle, but when he heard that, his heart stirred. He recalled Amon's description and couldn't help but ask, the source refers to the oldest one, the first creator. He desperately wanted to know what sort of unbearable fate Sapphira Castle would bring him. Amon pinched the edge of his monocle and looked at him for a few seconds before suddenly smiling. It's better if I don't answer this question directly, as you won't believe every word I say. Tell me, I'll determine its authenticity. Klein suppressed the urge to blurt out and calmly replied, maybe it's just because you haven't made up the reason yet. Amon didn't mind at all as he smiled and said, you can think of it that way too. Heh, at times, the truth that you discover for yourself is definitely more agreeable than what others tell you. If you have the time, you can wander around the forsaken land of the gods. This should provide you with more clues. Of course, if you have the guts to enter Chernobyl, then you would know more. Klein didn't pursue the matter any further. After staring at the collapsed cathedral that was bathed in a faint yellow light, he casually said, did the dark demonic wolf hurriedly migrate because of the discovery of your existence? Amon nodded slightly and said, it wasn't just me. He also sensed the hanged man's gaze. He has been hiding in the forsaken land of the gods for thousands of years. He is very sensitive to such matters. A sequence 2 angel, perhaps even a sequence 1 angel, can only play hide and seek in the forsaken land of the gods and live such an abject life. Isn't the environment here a little too harsh? Klein sighed inwardly before saying, you must have left more than one avatar in the City of Silver. Why didn't you try to stop me from reviving there? Why didn't you send more powerful avatars over? Amon nudged the bottom of his monocle with his right index finger and laughed. If that happens, you'll choose to revive in the outside world. This will cause quite a bit of trouble for my follow-up tracking. And if we were to relax a little, due to the existence of the miracle invoker beyonder characteristic in the forsaken land of the gods, you would most likely be resurrected here. In the following game, the only things that we need to consider are the Hanged Man and Ouroboros. Just as I thought. Klein said after some thought, even in the same region, as long as you exceed a certain distance, your true body and avatars have no way to instantly merge or switch locations. Back when you first entered the forsaken land of the gods, you were able to transform back into your true form because the anomalies with Sapphira Castle had similarly interfered with the area here, allowing your true body to sense something. You went to the entrance in advance to wait. After hearing what he said with a smile, Amon asked without answering, what's your guess? Why don't you guess if I've turned back into my original form? Klein raised his right fist and covered his mouth. After pondering for a few seconds, he revealed a smile. I guess your other avatars are setting up a corresponding ritual to allow your true body to descend directly. Before he could finish his sentence, his figure rapidly turned incorporeal and dissipated. The historical void projection was dispelled. In the wilderness outside the ancient city of noise, the air around the hiding Kleins suddenly stirred. In midair, there were a series of illusory monocles. They stared at Klein's figure, as if saying that they had finally found him. However, Klein's figure rapidly faded away. Back when Amon moved the monocle to his right eye, Klein had already returned from ancient history to the real world. With the help of Paper Angel, he had used Flaming Jump and other Beyonder powers to quickly leave. The reason why his historical projection was able to speak to Amon rather normally was because he was essentially a marionette. It was Kona's Kilgore in the form of Gehrman Sparrow. He had a worm of spirit that came from history inside him and was controlled by Klein's projection outside the city. Meanwhile, in the process of escaping far away, Klein frequently entered the historical void, allowing the projection outside the city to intermittently regain consciousness and maintain control of his marionette. This caused the person who had spoken to Amon to fall into deep thought from time to time. He would either stare with a focused look for a few seconds or seemingly need time to recall what Amon had said. Against the god of deceit, Klein didn't dare to be careless. After leaving Noise City, he circled around 2 more times and used his true vision to inspect his surroundings above the gray fog. Only then did he slow down. The corrosion that comes from the source. I wonder if Amon is bluffing me. Indeed, I'll have to enter Chernobyl one day to take a look, but I have to become a miracle invoker, doing so after I have self-preservation abilities to a certain degree, otherwise, I'll just be knocking on death's door. With the lantern that Danitz had sacrificed, Klein casually proceeded in the dark environment of the weeds. Thanks to this experience, he finally had a deeper understanding of the danger in the forsaken land of the gods. Extremely harsh and warped environment, crazy cultists, fallen angel, groups of Amons wandering about, and mythical creatures lurking in the darkness. Somewhere here, there are evil gods watching everything. I can stir remnant divine powers that others can as well. As expected of the forsaken land of the gods. The danger level far exceeds my imagination. As he sighed, he turned his attention back to the dark demonic wolf. To be frank, he didn't think he had any advantage in tracking this mythical creature. Be it his understanding of the forsaken land of the gods, or his confidence in the target situation, he was far inferior to Amon, who had been exploring the area for more than 1,000 years, as well as the true creators blessed who had the benefit of this place being their home ground. My only advantage is that I share the same seer pathway as the dark demonic wolf. Furthermore, I have Sapphira Castle. There is a strong inclination for Beyonder characteristic convergence. This will have a certain effect on fate and judgment. However, Amon is a king of angels of a neighboring pathway. There is also the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence between him and the dark demonic wolf. The effects won't be any weaker than mine. Klein considered carefully for a moment when he suddenly had an idea. He found his best advantage. The advantage was, he was very weak. Compared to Amon, the true creator's attendant, and the dark demonic wolf, he was very weak. Under normal circumstances, this was a disadvantage, but at times, it was possible that it could bring him something that he wanted. My level is low, and I'm weak. That means that I can become the hunting target of the dark demonic wolf instead. It's very difficult for me to find him, so why don't I get him to come and find me instead? A scholar of your might not necessarily interest the dark demonic wolf, but if this scholar of your can still trigger Sapphira Castle, that's a whole other matter. I can stir Sapphira Castle from time to time, leaving behind traces of the gray fog's aura as bait for the dark demonic wolf. The more he thought, the more viable he believed it was. Of course, this was definitely very dangerous. If he wasn't careful, he might accidentally bait Amon or even the true creator. And the dark demonic wolf might very likely choose to observe first before suddenly launching an attack and not giving him a chance to prepare. Before taking this approach, I have to make sufficient preparations. There's no need to rush it. Taking a deep breath, Klein reached out his hand and pulled out the black demonic wolf sculpture's fragment that was red on the inside. Although he had failed to obtain the item due to Amon's obstruction, this didn't stop him from taking it out from the historical void. This was because he had already seen it and had touched it. And the item itself wasn't at a high level. At this moment, he wanted to use the fragment to search for the hiding spot of the dark demonic wolf by analyzing it in reverse and figuring out its modus operandi. In the wilderness ruled by darkness, Klein lifted the lantern that emitted a faint yellow light. He got his bearings and changed directions before slowly entering Backlund, Hilston. Furs, who had gone out traveling once, finally received a reply from her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. There are no worms of star at the moment. He wants me to take note of what else the person who's seeking to purchase a worm of star needs. Furs read the letter from her teacher and silently heaved a sigh of relief. However, when she thought about how she was about to begin hunting the Saint of Secrets, she felt a pang of nervousness. After all, he was a demigod, a saint who had reached sequence for about 1 or 2 years ago. It was unknown if he was already at sequence 3 now. Although the mastermind behind the operation is Ma'am Hermit, as the bait, I still need to worry about my own safety. Besides, the Aurora Order still has Rose Redemption backing them, as well as angels and a King of Angels. Furs didn't regret agreeing to Gehrman Sparrow's request. This was something she had wanted to do in the first place. However, due to the high risk involved, it was inevitable for her to feel flustered and uneasy. This made her think of another possibility: if Mr. World could participate in the operation and lead it, I'll definitely feel less nervous and worried. It wasn't that Furs didn't believe in Ma'am Hermit's strength and experience, but that the results from the World Gehrman Sparrow were laid bare for all to see. His hunts didn't include 1 or 2 demigods, so having him run the operation would make one feel at ease. Zio, who was sitting beside the fireplace, glanced at her friend and asked, "Is the hunt about to begin?" "Yes." Furs nodded solemnly before saying, "It won't be too soon. Everyone needs some time to prepare." Hunting a demigod wasn't akin to fox hunting in the suburbs during autumn. Setting off wasn't as simple as bringing the equipment and gathering friends. This required a precise and meticulous plan. Furs believed that Ma'am Hermit had to come to Backlund personally, or live in another kill box that she had decided on for some time. Only by figuring out the exact situation could she come up with an effective plan. As for Miss Justice, she was still speeding up the digestion of her Dreamwalker potion. This might take another 1 to 2 months or even longer. For Furs, she could afford to wait. She also wanted to finish digesting her scribe potion, set up the ritual, and become a traveler before the actual operation began. The only thing she wasn't sure of was whether the world would rush them. "I will try my best to convince him." "No, let Miss Justice convince him. That's what a spectator is best at." Just as Furs mumbled, she saw Zio turn around and hesitantly say, "The liaison officer from MI9 suggested that I should officially join them today. And they said that, with the new king in place, there are many matters from the past that I don't need to worry about. People like me and him have the chance to have importance placed on them again." Furs listened attentively and said after some deliberation, "That isn't some sort of investigation that's targeted at us, right? This will likely make them discover that there's a faction behind you." Zio nodded and said, "They believe that I was abandoned after that incident. Also, they suspect that that faction belongs to a church, the Church of Evernight." Zio believed in the Evernight goddess, so mentioning the church was undoubtedly referring to the Church of Evernight. However, considering that her good friend was a believer in the god of steam and machinery, she made an emphasis to prevent any ambiguity. "Heh, that's what Mr. World told us to disguise ourselves as." Furs stroked her hair with a relaxed expression and said with a smile. She then made herself look serious and mature. "Zio, this is an opportunity for you. Acting as a judge clearly requires the support of the officials. Your current strength and level aren't enough to be a judge in the underground world in Backlund. You also lack sufficient support. If you can really enter a court of law, rotate between the different courts, and serve in a criminal court for a few months, your potion should be completely digested. Oh right, I heard that MI9 has a paranormal court within it, one which specializes in beyonder cases. If you become a judge there, you might be able to attempt to be a disciplinary paladin by February or March next year. Seeing Zio clearly being moved by her speech, Furs hurriedly added, once you make enough contributions, you might be able to restore your father's reputation to a certain extent. Anyway, George III is already dead. As long as it doesn't affect his reputation, Jevington too might not stop it. Jevington was the eldest son of George III. He had worn the crown as Balam's emperor and was now the new king of Lone. Zio fell silent for a while before she slowly nodded. I'll give it a try. Yes, after things settle down, you can bring your mother and brother to Backlund. Although the situation is tense now and food prices are rapidly rising, you definitely get food rations from MI9. You can provide for them. The more Furs spoke, the more she felt that joining MI9 was a good thing. After persuading Zio, Furs entered her bedroom and prayed to Mr. Fool, asking him to forward her message to Mr. World. Immediately following that, Furs extracted the important points of her teacher's reply and described her thoughts, hoping that Gehrman Sparrow could be more patient. Just as she finished her prayers and was about to leave the room, her vision suddenly blurred. She saw a crimson tide surge out of the void, instantly drowning her. Furs immediately discovered that she had arrived in the ancient palace and was sitting on her usual high-back chair. However, there was no towering figure that was shrouded in grey fog at the long, bronze table's seat of honor. At that moment, there was only her and the world Gehrman Sparrow around the long modelled table. Furs's mind suddenly tensed up as her thoughts raced suddenly. Mr. World, I meant, just now, that it's best if you have some patience. This will make things simpler. It's actually fine if you don't. We will begin hunting as soon as possible. Klein let out a soft chuckle. Don't worry, I'm not in a hurry. When his ultimate goal had become an angel-level potion formula and grade 0 sealed artifacts, he had enough patience regarding this matter. Phew. Furs secretly heaved a sigh of relief and asked curiously, then why did you look for me? Klein replied calmly, didn't you wish to digest the scribe potion as quickly as possible? Apart from the customs of different places, I think you still need to record all kinds of beyonder powers. The higher the corresponding level, the better the digestion's effect. Furs's eyes lit up when she heard that. Yes. Yes. After blurting it out, she found her attitude highly questionable. She hurriedly and fearfully added, is this the advance payment you mentioned before? Klein nodded slightly and said, let's begin. Be prepared. I've borrowed a grade 1 sealed artifact from Mr. Fool. It corresponds to the level of a saint. To a sequence 6 scribe, the chances of successfully recording an angel-level beyonder power was extremely low, nearly impossible. Therefore, Klein didn't attempt to summon Miss Messenger and Mr. Azek from the historical void to showcase their skills. Furs sat up straight and nodded heavily. Yes. In the next second, she saw the world Gehrman Sparrow raise a white bone scepter covered in blue gems. Amidst the bright light, bolts of lightning leaped out of the void and interwove together, forming a forest of lightning that emitted an aura of destruction. Furs's eyes turned silvery white as her body and mind were left in awe. After the lightning storm calmed down, she was stunned for 2 seconds before timidly saying, it failed, again, Klein calmly replied. Lightning storm descended again and again in the ancient palace above the grey fog. After an unknown period of time, Furs exhaled and leaned back in her chair. She couldn't hide her joy as she said, it's a success. It's a success, she had finally recorded lightning storm once. It's finally over. Furs immediately relaxed. Then, she heard the world say without emotion, all right, next beyonder power. Next. Furs saw the crazy adventurer at the bottom of the long, model table extend his right hand and grab at the grayish-white fog. Out of nowhere, he took out a long, thorny cross that was covered in bronze. Record this cross's ability. Furs tried hard to make her expression appear normal. After she digested the scribe potion to a certain extent, the godhood powers that she could record had increased from 1 to 2. No. Klein glanced at Miss Magician and said, "Record my summoning of the unshadowed crucifix." "It failed," Furs said softly. The reason for her failure this time was that she didn't have time to record it. Dispelling the maintenance of unshadowed crucifix, Klein once again reached into the fog of history and pulled out an iron-black revolver. "It didn't succeed." Furs replied with a complicated expression. All she wanted to do now was to return to the real world and digest what she had just received, but the ringing of the bell to mark the end of class just didn't happen. Nearly 30 times later, when Furs's head throbbed in pain and her mental strength was beginning to run dry, she finally recorded historical void summoning once. At that moment, she felt her tears fill her eyes, but she still held back her fatigue and tried her best to show the attitude of a good student. This can summon people and objects that one is related to through the historical void. When the time comes, who should I summon, or what item should I summon? Klein looked at Miss Magician and coldly replied, "Me." Furs forced a smile and asked, "From which period?" "The last time we met." Klein had already thought of an answer. It was the him who had deliberately sent Miss Magician back from the world of ice and snow to Backlund before he destroyed George III's ritual. He had already become a scholar of Europe by then. Furs nodded solemnly and subconsciously asked, "What if I fail?" For me to summon someone who exceeds my own level, the probability of failure should be very high. Come again tomorrow to record this ability. Use Lamino's travels, Klein said calmly. Will 2 times be enough to succeed? Furs instinctively had such a question. However, she didn't dare to speak when she saw how certain the world German Sparrow was about it. She raised her hand and gestured. "Then, can I go back now?" With a terse answer, he allowed Miss Magician to leave Sapphira Castle with a delighted expression. In a primitive forest on Sonia Island, Alger Wilson led his subordinates into an elven ruin that was seldom visited. The withered vines drooped down, covering the rotting wooden structure. The entire ruins had been frozen in a silent atmosphere that no one had tread within for a while. Alger and a few sailors circled around the ruin in the environment of a withering winter, but they still failed to discover anything of value. "Captain, batches of adventurers have come here before. What else could they have left us?" Finally, a sailor in his 30s impatiently broke the silence. This resonated with his other companions as they echoed, "A place that didn't take us much time to learn about can definitely be easily found by others." That's right, that's right. Let's continue to F***K the Phasations. "Captain, are you trying to make this place a stronghold?" Alger slowly scanned the area, quelling the sailors to stop their complaints under his gaze and making them choose to obey. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "I plan on using this place to ambush the Phasations. Let's observe the terrain and see if it's suitable." With such an excuse, the sailors barely perked up, and the group quickly entered the depths of the elven ruins. As he walked, Alger's spiritual perception was triggered as he subconsciously looked behind a gigantic tree. There were some signs of churning in the soil over there, and it wouldn't take more than a year. Alger retracted his gaze and pretended not to notice anything amiss. He naturally looked elsewhere. After exploring the elven ruins, they returned to their new camp. At that moment it was almost evening and the forest was getting colder. Alger had dinner with the sailors before leaving 2 patrolling guards behind, and then all of them entered their respective tents. The cold wind blew through the trees, causing the bonfire to sway. Alger, who had wanted to leave the campsite in the middle of the night, suddenly heard faint singing from afar. The voice was ethereal, like a woman humming and singing slowly, relating her inner thoughts. This made Alger involuntarily recall the past. He recalled his mother who had long passed away, and the days when he was a bullied child. Indescribable grief surged from the bottom of his heart, preventing him from waking up immediately. He waited for a few seconds before he suddenly sat up, frowning and listening. This time, he didn't hear anything. That melodious voice seemed to have never happened. Alger narrowed his eyes, grabbed his thick jacket, and put it on. He walked out of the tent and came to the bonfire. The two sailors in charge of night duty had just finished their patrol and were drawing warmth from it. "Did you discover anything unusual?" Alger asked in a deep voice. The two strong, vigorous sailors shook their heads. No. Alger's brows relaxed a little as he turned around, intending to make his own rounds. At this moment, he noticed something from the corner of his eye. The two sailors were too close. If it were any ordinary pirate, this wouldn't have been a problem. However, Alger's subordinates had undergone formal training through the Church of the Lord of Storms. They definitely knew that, in such an environment, the patrol team had to maintain a certain distance from each other. They couldn't be too far or too close. They had to be able to see their companions, as well as prevent themselves from being taken away at the same time from a single assault. Alger took 2 steps without batting an eyelid. He turned back and casually asked, "Did you discover anything normal?" He had changed the question and made it appear very strange. The two strong sailors shook their heads and replied without changing their expressions, "No. No." Alger nodded slightly with a relaxed expression. "Very good." He turned around and slowly walked into his tent. The moment the sailor's attention on him was cut off, Alger drew out the blade of poison and the gargoyle glasses. He opened his mouth and prepared to belt out a song. At that moment, the ethereal voice from before appeared once again. It echoed in Alger's ears and pierced into his mind. This was an extremely ancient folk song, spelling out an extreme sense of sadness and melancholy through the singing. It made Alger's spirit body produce pale, non-existent arms that constantly tore at him. Alger's expression twisted as his skin began to produce slippery, black fish scales. His dark blue hair stood up one by one as they became abnormally thick. The thoughts that originally existed in his mind were disrupted by the song and were cut off by the pain. They were unable to take form any further. Alger fell and struggled on the ground. He squirmed, becoming less and less like a human as he was pushed to the brink of losing control. Suddenly, the singing stopped. A slightly indifferent voice entered Alger's ears. "Some elven blood, then, that shall be all. Use Ciatas's Beyonder characteristic well." Alger's forehead was covered in cold sweat as he slowly got up. He didn't know when a figure had appeared in the tent. It was a woman with black hair and exquisite facial features. Her ears were slightly pointy, and her eyes were deep. Her facial features were soft, and she wore a complicated and ancient long dress. Even though she didn't have the advantage in height, she still gave off an air of superiority. "Are you the elf queen, Queen of Calamity Kohinum?" A thought flashed through Alger's mind as he took the initiative to ask. The woman played with a beautifully decorated golden cup and calmly said, "Haven't you already met me?" Alger suddenly recalled the similar singing he had heard on Pasu Island. He recalled seeing a high elf when he entered the underwater coral palace. After a few seconds of silence, Alger said in a deep voice, "You're actually still alive." At the same time, he silently recited Mr. Fool's honorific name in his heart, but he didn't know if it would be effective if he didn't recite it out loud. The black-haired woman's expression remained unchanged as she replied, "It's very difficult for an angel to perish without encountering an enemy." "Then why did you split the characteristics and place yourself to be in a strange state? This makes you need to wait for an opportunity to be resurrected." Alger had learned of the corresponding situation at the Tarot Club, and now, he was asking out of curiosity, partly to stall for time. The elven lady suspected to be Queen of Calamity Kohinum snorted. "Because the divine throne for Storm is occupied by Leotaro, and I have no way of resisting the tyrant. Also, the elves are dwindling in numbers. My anchors are becoming increasingly unstable. Other people might not know who Leotaro was, but Alger knew very well. He didn't dare continue this topic in the real world. Just as he was about to ask the Queen of Calamity Kohainam's goal for coming, the Elf Queen said, "Do you want to become a demigod? She wants to use my body to revive. She wants to use my wish to advance to sequence 4 and obtain godhood as bait to intrude my body." While Alger was tempted, questions arose in his mind. Considering how Mr. Fool could cleanse all kinds of corruption, Alger acutely felt that this was an opportunity. This made him recall a term Emperor Roselle had once mentioned, a Trojan horse. And now, he had a high chance of bringing in the Trojan horse and throwing out the invaders within. "What do you want me to do?" Alger didn't appear too anxious as he raised a question based on his personality. Queen of Calamity Kohainam observed him for a few seconds before saying, "When you have the right to make contact with the Book of Calamity, take out something that no one else will notice, and take it to the Western Continent." The Western Continent. The legendary homeland of the elves. Alger frowned slightly and said, "Hasn't the Western Continent already disappeared?" The corners of Kohainam's lips curled up slightly. "Since it disappeared, it will reappear again. It will definitely appear again when the apocalypse happens." Without waiting for Alger to ask further, the Elf Queen paused and said, "You don't have to personally send that item to the Western Continent, but you have to entrust someone trustworthy. Although I'm not skilled at curses, I can still make you die in pain from breaking our agreement. But what if the Western Continent doesn't appear again, or if it can't be entered?" Alger thought seriously for a moment. Kohainam, with her gentle gaze and lustrous raven-black hair, seemed to be lost in beautiful memories. After a few seconds, she calmly said, "If it really doesn't appear again, then the agreement shall be null and void. Perhaps entering the Western Continent requires an incantation or command, but I do not know what it is. However, you can ask a particular existence." "Who?" Alger asked, puzzled. Kohainam glanced at him and coldly said, "The Mr. Fool you were chanting in your heart just now. I have a feeling that he is the key to this matter." Alger's heart tightened as he hurriedly lowered his head in response. "I understand." Seeing this, Queen of Calamity Kohainam nodded slightly and said, "If you wish to become a demigod and abide by this agreement, you can head to the Elven Ruins when the sun rises." After the voice fell, the Elf Queen's figure quickly dissipated, like a mirage that was often seen at sea and in the desert. Alger suddenly opened his eyes and realized that he was lying in a tent, having just woken up. His memories were in a mess, but he quickly regulated them. He and his sailors had just found the location of an elven ruin and had yet to explore it. The previous exploration, singing, sailor anomalies, and appearance and conversation with Calamity were all just a dream. It's no wonder I was so careless. Even though I knew that I might encounter the Queen of Calamity, I didn't pray to Mr. Fool first. The Queen of Calamity relied on her status as an angel to create this realistic dream. Or perhaps, she has a corresponding sealed artifact. Even if she exists in a special state, she still has the means to use her powers. Alger listened to the commotion outside the tent, and he realized that everything was normal. He then sat down and prayed sincerely to Mr. Fool. In just 20 to 30 seconds, Alger arrived above the gray fog and saw Mr. Fool sitting at the end of the long, model table. "You met Kohainam?" After the hanged man greeted him, the Fool Klein spoke casually. Alger answered seriously, "Yes, but I can't be sure that it's the Elf Queen." Chapter 1186 Opportunity and Danger are two sides of the same coin. The Fool acknowledged softly and didn't deny the hanged man's guess, nor was he certain that it was Queen of Calamity Kohainam. After all, it was impossible for him to take out a gold coin in front of him and perform a divination on the spot. Alger waited for a few seconds. Seeing no clear response from Mr. Fool, he quickly went into greater detail about what he had said in the prayer. From the woman suspected to be Queen of Calamity Kohainam saying that he had some elven blood in him, to how she gave him a promise of becoming a demigod, as well as the key to the Western Continent and the completion of the agreement. After recounting everything, Alger shut his mouth and lowered his head, not daring to directly ask Mr. Fool what he thought. He obediently waited for the great existence to speak. Some elven blood. Send something from the Book of Calamity to the Western Continent. The missing Western Continent might reappear again. The Western Continent. The Fool Klein listened quietly. He closed his eyes and calmly said, "This is very dangerous, but this is also an opportunity for you." He had already gained initial control of Sapphira Castle, and the power he could mobilize had reached the level of a Sequence 2 angel. As for Queen of Calamity Kohinum, she couldn't be higher than this level, therefore, he was quite confident that he could resist the various accidents brought about by the Elf Queen. It was precisely because of this that he dared to claim it to be an opportunity for the Hanged Man. Of course, the prerequisite for grasping the opportunity was that the Hanged Man wasn't rash or went overboard. He had to constantly remember to ask for protection at all times. Therefore, Klein specially emphasized that it was very dangerous. He wanted the Hanged Man to remember to pray to Mr. Fool before he took action. This short sentence had two meanings to it, but he believed that Mr. Hanged Man would definitely understand it. Alger was delighted as he replied rather sincerely, as though he had learned from the sun, "My faith lies only with Mr. Fool." These words made Klein feel uneasy as he remembered the pain of being drowned by endless lightning. He could only smile without saying a word. Alger deliberated for a moment before asking, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what are the incantations or commands needed to enter the Western Continent?" "I would like to know that too." The Fool Klein sighed and said, "It's not time for you to know." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Alger didn't ask further as he bowed respectfully. When he returned to the real world, he immediately walked out of the tent and led his sailors out. Under the light of the morning sun, he spent a certain amount of time reaching the elven ruin. The scene here was identical to what he had seen in his dream. The withered vines covered the decaying wooden structure, and there were some areas where the text on monuments could be seen. The air seemed to have frozen, as though no one had stepped in for a long time. Looking around, Alger suddenly thought of a question. How was he to face the church after he really relied on the Queen of Calamity to become a demigod? Directly rebel, becoming the fifth king over the 5 seas, no, the 6th king. But this way, I won't have a chance to come into contact with the Book of Calamity. Unless I design a situation that forces the church to use this sealed artifact that might have been labeled as Grade 0 without my knowledge. That will not only be very difficult, but I have to become a sea king, or even a calamity to succeed. Yes, I can request the world's help. If I wish to continue staying in the church, I have to give them a reason that they cannot ignore but is sufficiently believable. Alger frowned slightly without hiding his solemnity. In the eyes of the sailors who followed him, this was a sign that he was worried about the ruin. As his thoughts churned, Alger gradually came up with ideas. There are many books in the church that have records of people turning into demigods due to a fortuitous encounter. 2/3 of them were invaded by evil gods and devils and eventually lost their lives in the purification process. However, 1/3 of them passed the test and became a high-ranking deacon or a cardinal. Now that the war has broken out, the situation in Lone is tense. As long as there aren't any problems during the investigation, the church wouldn't mind having an additional sequence for demigod as cannon fodder. Then, I can slowly gain their trust later. The prerequisite for all of this is that the Queen of Calamity hasn't truly attempted to corrupt me or left a mark on me. Considering the various sealed artifacts in the church's possession, I have to pray for Mr. Fool's blessings ahead of time. According to Miss Justice, Angel's Embrace can effectively hide one's true thoughts and tests in one's dream. With the members of the Tarot Club beginning to become demigods or about to become demigods, Alger really didn't wish to be lining the bottom of the barrel. Just like in the past, he had done so many things in the church, all for the sake of being superior to others. Now, he was naturally willing to take a certain risk. With this decision, Alger immediately led his sailors into the ruins and began exploring the path in his dreams. This time, he didn't split his subordinates into small teams. On the one hand, he was worried that an accident might occur, and on the other hand, he hoped that they could all be his witness. After 15 minutes, Alger and his crew arrived beside the giant tree that had signs of its soil being churned. Before he could survey his surroundings, his vision blurred, and he saw a gorgeous palace made up of coral. Above the palace was a layer of deep blue seawater that rippled outwards. Giant pillars stood tall and held up an exaggerated dome. It was tall and beautiful, but also dark and gloomy. Alger looked around and realized that all the sailors beside him had disappeared. He immediately knew that he might have been pulled into an illusion. He took a silent breath and slowly walked into the coral palace. There were many elves inside. They were either roasting fish or placing spices in the coagulated animal blood. Their choice of utensil was 2 tree branches to bring the food to their mouths. None of them minded the entrance of a stranger. Alger then cast his gaze to the 9-staired stairs 100 meters away. On the steps, there was a coral throne inlaid with sapphires, emerald, and lustrous pearls. The elf queen, Queen of Calamity, was sitting there, looking down at Alger. Very good. Kohainem nodded and threw out the exquisite gold wine glass. The gentle but resilient wind held the wine cup in its embrace and, like tiny pixies in a line, carried the corresponding items towards Alger. Alger reached out to receive it and looked down. He discovered that there was a blue liquid inside the golden cup. It was incorporeal, dreamy, and surreal. Drink it, and then head to the waters near the Simeem island of the Rorstad archipelago. Find this coral palace. The thing you want is inside. If I don't drink this wine, I won't be able to see that palace. Alger asked thoughtfully. Although he was facing an angel, he was still able to communicate rather calmly. This was because he met a mighty figure every week and was already used to this situation. Queen of Calamity Kohainem nodded and said, "That's right. Will you leave a mark on me?" Alger asked cautiously. "Yes," Kohainem said coldly. "So, before entering the Coral Palace and obtaining the corresponding items, you can't return to Pasu Island. You can't meet the angels under Leotaro. The pontiff can't be met even if I want to." Alger heaved a sigh of relief inwardly before asking, "After I get hold of that item, the effect of this wine will disappear?" Elf Queen Kohainem replied without any change in expression, "No, you need to directly consume that characteristic. When the time comes, this wine will transform into a seal, allowing that characteristic to temporarily not invade your body. How you prepare the ritual and explain this to the Church of Storms will be up to you. Let the characteristic belong to me first before holding the ritual. This way, there might be a better way for the Church to accept it." Alger thought for a moment before raising his hand to bring the wine cup to his lips. The ice-cold liquid slid down his throat and disappeared in a blink of an eye. The entire coral palace shattered as the light of dawn and the remnants of the gigantic green tree reappeared in front of Alger. "You didn't sign a contract or get me to swear an oath." "Yes, drinking that cup of wine is equivalent to making an agreement." Alger retracted his gaze and said to the surrounding sailors who were unaware, "There's nothing here. Let's go deeper and take a look." In the ancient palace above the fog. Klein also retracted his gaze from the crimson star representing the hanged man and nodded thoughtfully. "That's Siada's and Mobit's grave. I never expected that golden wine cup to have such an effect. That is indeed Elf Queen Kohainem. How's her present condition?" "Half of it is in the Book of Calamity, while the other is hiding somewhere unknown. She was using the golden wine cup or the characteristic to influence reality. Mr. Hanged Man hasn't been contaminated for the time being. I'll wait for him to head to the Rorstad archipelago before making another assessment." As his true body had a limited amount of time left in the historical void, Klein didn't stay any longer, and he returned to the pitch-black wilderness. He carried the lantern that emitted a faint yellow light as he walked towards a certain location. As he walked, he turned his head to look east, which was symbolic of where Chernobyl was. His footsteps slowed down involuntarily. Once I gather sufficient information from the dark demonic wolf's former hiding spots, I'll head east. I'll walk all the way until I reach the boundary and confirm the situation. Then, I'll consider the matter of the miracle invoker beyonder characteristic. Amon probably wouldn't expect that I would suddenly leave. He definitely knows the past of the dark demonic wolf. It's impossible for him to do the same kinds of investigations that I'll be doing. Yes, but he will definitely be tracking me. Klein exhaled slowly and sped up his pace. A bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the dark and red desolate plains. Raindrops began dripping down intermittently. Klein dragged out a black umbrella from the historical void. With one hand holding an umbrella and the other holding the lantern, he proceeded alone. About a week later, the future was docked somewhere along the long lone coastline. Katlia held a stack of tarot cards in her hand and said to the sailors, "Nina and company, I'll be staying in Lone for some time. All of you have to watch Frank and prevent him from doing his strange experiments." Upon hearing the captain's instructions, Nina pouted and pointed out the window. "Are any of Frank's experiments not strange?" Katlia was momentarily at a loss for words. All she could do was sigh and say, "If there are any signs of danger, write to me immediately." As a mysticologist, she also had her own messenger. "All right." Nina puffed her chest out and said, "If there's anything to blame, it's solely because I'm the most mature and reliable person on the future." Having said that, she asked curiously, "Captain, what are you doing in Lone? What mission did you take on? Are you going to engage in some sabotage raids behind enemy lines?" Nina was of Phaeacian descent, and she was considered half Intis. She naturally had some inclinations in the recent war, therefore, she guessed that her captain had established contact with Intis's intelligence department. "You could say that," Katlia replied sternly. In a sense, Nina's guess wasn't wrong. She had indeed taken on a mission and was dealing damage in Lone's capital, Backlund. However, her target wasn't an official faction, but a cultist. Furthermore, there's still a chance to meet the Queen. She probably hasn't left Backlund yet, and the earliest she'll leave is probably after the new year. Upon thinking of this, Katlia suddenly felt a little excited. Ever since she left the Dawn, she hadn't really met Queen Mystic. She only had letters to communicate with her, or despite being on the same boat, they didn't communicate with one another for some reason. Nina didn't dare to press further as she pointed to the door and said, "Captain, is there anything else? If not, we'll leave." Katlia nodded, indicating that this future bosun could leave with her subordinates. Just as Nina held the handle and gently twisted it, Katlia suddenly recalled something and hurriedly shouted, "Nina." Nina, whose blonde hair was tied into a high ponytail, turned around with a confused expression. "Don't drink," Katlia emphasized seriously. "When I return to the ship, you'll be allowed to have your fill." Nina immediately revealed a charming smile. "Deal." Katlia thought for a moment before exhorting, "Apart from Frank, you have to take note of Heath's condition. Don't let him generate curiosity towards unknown voices, and don't let him be overly exhausted. Also, pull Ottolov out of his room frequently, and control the frequency and times he interacts with mysticism knowledge. Also, I know. Don't I know them all too well?" Nina waved her hand and agreed. After the bosun and her subordinates left the captain's cabin and closed the door behind them, Katlia cast her gaze out the window to look at the currently invisible Backlund. After a few minutes, she took out a tarot card from the deck in her hand. It depicted a lonely old man with a glass lantern and a staff, the hermit card. Late at night, Backlund, Empress Burrow, Earl Hall's house. Audrey, who was wearing a white silk nightgown, suddenly opened her eyes. She took a blue cloak and draped it over her body. She then got out of bed and walked to the full-body mirror in the room. Through the crimson moonlight shining through the curtains, she carefully observed herself. Her pair of emerald green eyes seemed to glow brightly and limpid. It was so clear that one could clearly see every detail. Audrey closed her eyes. By the time she opened them again, all the abnormalities had vanished. The corners of her mouth curled up bit by bit, and a small depression appeared on her face. Her eyes curved slightly as she silently praised herself. Audrey, you've finally come this far. She had completely digested the Dreamwalker potion. According to her confidence in herself, and her predictions, she had originally believed that it would take until February for her to digest the potion. To her surprise, she had encountered many strange and completely different dreams recently. This included many dreams within dreams, dreams that were a result of a mental illness, lucid dreams, dreams caused by the influence of evil spirits and wraiths, and the dreams of a few demigods. Under normal circumstances, as a dreamwalker, Audrey could generally determine the creature's level when entering a dream, thus avoiding danger. However, those demigods had hidden themselves very well. Only when she entered their dreams did she realize that something was amiss and nearly jumped in fright. Fortunately, she wasn't discovered all those times. She ended up accumulating experience, and she began carefully touring, traveling, observing, and analyzing in the demigod's dreams, allowing her to greatly digest her potion. In addition, the other special dreams gave her a completely different experience. After that, she attempted creating multiple dreams within dreams. Some attempted to hide behind the scenes in her dreams and guide them in an ingenious manner to develop and interfere with the subconscious in a reverse manner. She treated the mental illness of the owners of the dreams, or the corruption caused by an evil spirit or wraith. To a certain extent, she had gone against the requirements of only observing, recording, and not making any interference. Yet, this strangely accelerated the digestion of the potion. This made her conclude a new principle: if you really want to interfere, then be the mastermind and conductor behind the scenes. It's so that even if the goal succeeds, no one will notice it. This was something that Audrey had done very well. The few people with serious mental illnesses had unknowingly recovered after having 5 or 6 strange dreams. And it was very normal for a dream to appear strange and incomprehensible. To be able to digest the Dreamwalker potion so quickly, it's mainly a result of my good luck recently. Without so many unique experiences, I'd definitely have to wait another month or 2. Yes, I might even be caught by a demigod and be thrown into a beyonder prison or directly be killed. When did my luck become so good? It seems like it started after I sacrificed the ice cream to that Fate Domain's angel, his blessed. Audrey looked at her reflection and blinked her eyes with a smile. She quickly retracted her gaze, scanned her bedroom, and walked to the dressing table. Sitting on it was a deck of cards. In a room of a girl who enjoyed mysticism, it was normal for her to have a deck of tarot cards. Audrey stretched out her right hand and touched the card at the top with her fingertip. She slowly took a deep breath and muttered to herself, "The fighting at the Amantha mountain range is getting more intense." Mid-Seashore had already lost a port. It said that the defenses of the Hornacis mountain range in Civilaus County can't last until spring. If not for the fact that we have gained a significant advantage at sea, our connection with the southern continent's East Balam would have surely been severed. Alfred is still there. I wonder how this war will develop. Thankfully, I'm about to become a demigod. Mr. World has already given me the manipulator's potion formula and main ingredient. The 7 drops of tears that were shed from intense human emotions have also been found during my dream experience recently. The tree mentor's golden leaves were obtained via a trade with Little Sunday. I'm just short of the blood of an elderly mind dragon. Phew, I'll try to trade for it with the psychology alchemists. Before Vin Rambis died, I was already the person in charge of a small psychological discussion group. But will this reveal that Vin Rambis's death has something to do with me? Or could I get Mr. World to summon the blood of an elderly mind dragon from history? This can last for at least 15 minutes. When I succeed in advancing, I'll converge my spirituality and complete my queuing. Its disappearance will not affect anything. After all, it's just a supplementary material, Audrey, you actually learned how to fake things. What's more, it's on such matters. After a self-deprecating comment, Audrey began to think about the kind of situation to use to complete the advancement ritual of a manipulator. The ritual required one to drink the potion while in the midst of an emotional resonance generated during a special occasion with at least 10,000 people. As her thoughts raced, Audrey came up with a preliminary idea: the goddess's winter gifts day. But no matter how large a mass is, it can't accommodate 10,000 people. The cathedral can't accommodate so many people. Yes, it's usually impossible. If there's a chance, I can donate a sum of money. I can suggest we do an extremely large mass in Memorial Square so as to placate the souls that passed away during the war. In the most important square, the family members, relatives, and friends of the deceased are invited. As long as they accommodate a certain proportion of the participants, the emotions that resonate will affect the others who are participating in mass, allowing the ritual's requirements to be satisfied. After calmly analyzing the situation, Audrey suddenly bowed her head and looked at the mirror on the dressing table. She saw that the faint smile on her beautiful face had long disappeared, leaving behind only calmness and sadness in her eyes. She stared at herself, her lips curling up slightly as she whispered, "Audrey, you've become despicable." Closing her eyes and opening them again, Audrey had returned to normal. She reached out to the stack of tarot cards on the dressing table and flipped the card at the top. The card depicted a goddess of justice sitting on a stone chair with a sword in one hand and a balance in the other, coldly watching everything. Backlund, Hillston Borough, in a house with a fireplace. "You finished digesting your scribe potion?" Zio had just changed into her home clothes when she heard the piece of unbelievable news upon walking back to the living room. Furs nodded with a haggard expression. "Yes. Do you know what kind of life I've been enduring recently?" As she was being forced to travel to 6 places in a consecutive manner, she had to experience, admire, and record the sights day and night. In addition, she would be pulled up above the gray fog, recording all kinds of strange or high-level beyonder powers. The lightning storm and the historical void summoning powers had been replaced several times. They had finally recovered their original setup today. "I don't know." Zio answered honestly. "I know you don't know." Furs took a deep breath and said, "What about you? How have you been recently?" "Not too bad. It was arranged for me to preside over a paranormal court, and I had some thoughts about the acting principles." "The speed at which the potion is being digested has increased," Zio acknowledged. "I find it hard to imagine you wearing a judge's robe and sitting at the tribunal seat to judge." Furs sighed from the bottom of her heart. "Are you trying to say that the prisoners and lawyers won't be able to see me?" Zio added, not minding it at all. Furs laughed dryly and said, "I'll need to have some rest to prepare my advancement ritual to become a traveler." "Don't you need to go deep into the spirit world? Do you have a way?" Zio asked in puzzlement. Furs nodded and said, "That person asked me to summon his messenger." Chapter 1188 Thick-skinned Summon His Messenger. As judgment of the Tarot Club, as a member of MI9, Zio understood what a messenger meant. Furthermore, she knew that the middle ranks of the numinous episcopate widely used messengers. Before she could ask for more details, she saw Furs walk towards the guest room on the first floor with her eyes vacant and footsteps listless. She said with an ethereal voice, "Let me sleep for a while. We can talk later." She slept all the way till the next morning, waking up thanks to the aroma of meat. "Desi pie." Furs rubbed her eyes and walked out of the room. She saw that the table was already filled with food. "Yes." Zio came out of the bathroom. "The one from the corner of the street." "It's not bad." Furs enthusiastically acknowledged and sat beside the dining table. She quickly picked up the desi pie and stuffed it into her mouth. After finishing one, she drank a mouthful of sweet iced tea and sighed in satisfaction. "This is life. Oh no, I forgot to brush my teeth." After she was done washing up, she finally regained her ability to think. She looked at Zio in puzzlement and said, "Did MI9 not have any suspicions about how you secretly became a judge?" "They thought it was the remuneration that motivated me back then," Zio informed her of what she had learned. Furs stroked her hair and said with a smile, "That's true. Let them ask the Church of Evernight." She covered her mouth and yawned. "I'm going to summon that messenger." After this period of recording, the way she addressed Klein had changed from Gairman Sparrow and Mr. World to that person. On the one hand, it was a form of respect, and on the other hand, she was afraid that someone would eavesdrop. Upon hearing her friend's words, Zio looked around and asked in confusion, "Aren't you going to set up the ritual?" She remembered that summoning a messenger required a ritual. "That's only one of the methods. That person got me to use another method." Furs glanced at her clothes and realized that her clothes were all wrinkled since she hadn't had the time to change her clothes last night. Upon realizing that she would be meeting the messenger later, she decided to pay attention to her image. She hurriedly returned to the bedroom on the second floor and changed into a beige dress with frilly designs. After preparing herself, she raised her right hand in front of Zio, and she grabbed at it as if she wanted to pull something out of the air. In her eyes, an illusory book took form. It quickly flipped and stopped at one of the pages. In the next second, her arms sank and a figure emerged from the void. This was Gairman Sparrow, who was wearing a half-top hat and a black coat. He had a cold expression and an unyielding air, but his eyes appeared somewhat dull. "I succeeded. This is just my second attempt. I've only tried it once yesterday and failed." Furz's eyes widened as though they wanted to take in more light so as to see more clearly. She knew that this was the historical void projection she had summoned, so she wasn't too nervous. Instead, she held her breath and looked warily at Gairman Sparrow's projection. She couldn't tell if he was real or fake. She still remembered the combat achievements of this crazy adventurer. Furs has actually summoned Gairman Sparrow. Shouldn't it be his messenger? Would Gairman Sparrow still be able to summon something? Questions popped up in Zio's mind. Just as Furs was unsure of what to do next, Gairman Sparrow's eyes darted around slightly as his gaze instantly turned focused. He no longer had a rigid and vacant look, as though he was alive. Following that, he took out an exquisite, silvery harmonica and blew it. No sound came out of it, but the surroundings instantly turned cold as a biting wind stirred. Then, a woman dressed in a dark and complicated long dress with 4 blonde hair and red eyes in her hands walked out of the void. Her 8 eyes looked at Gairman Sparrow. Gairman Sparrow nodded slightly and pointed at Furs. "This lady needs to set up 4 special coordinates deep in the spirit world. Please help her." "All right," one of the heads of Rionette Tinker said as it moved up and down. Gairman Sparrow didn't speak further. As he approached the window, he made the glove on his left hand become transparent. His figure quickly disappeared as he teleported out of the house. He left. He left just like that. The historical void projection I summoned left just like that. Furs stared with her mouth slightly open, as though she was experiencing a comical play. According to her understanding, the thing she summoned should be under her control. How could it leave after giving some instructions? Could it be that the historical void projection has the same personality as the actual person? No, it's as if Gairman Sparrow himself had descended. Furs glanced at Zio and realized that she was just as confused as she was. At that moment, Furs suddenly shivered, as though an extremely terrifying creature was glaring at her. She subconsciously turned her head and realized that Gairman Sparrow's messenger was looking at her with 8 red eyes, carefully observing her. As terrifying as Gairman Sparrow. Furs forced a smile and said, "Sorry to trouble you." At this moment, Rionette Tinker's 4 blonde, red-eyed heads spoke one after another. "Need to pay 800 gold coins, there's still a fee." Furs turned agape once again, at a loss for a response. After a few seconds, her thoughts suddenly became active as she began to calculate her savings. After loaning £2,400 to Zio, I still have £780 left. My expenses recently have been quite high, but the royalties from my past novels are still being credited. Adding my other income and the £300 Zio returned me, I have a total of £1,258. That's enough, Furs immediately agreed, but she immediately discovered a problem. Gold coins, all of them. Rionette Tinker's foreheads shook slightly. Yes, you can, as expected, all of them need to be gold coins. I remember that Mr. World has been trying to gather gold coins and exchange for gold coins for quite some time before. It was to pay this messenger. The relationship between him and his messenger is really complicated. Mr. World should still have quite a few gold coins. I'll try to exchange 800 gold coins from him later. Furs secretly heaved a sigh of relief and said, all right. After agreeing, Furs saw the headless messenger raise one of the heads in her hand to bite down on her clothes near her shoulder. The surrounding colors became saturated and brighter, the reds became redder, the blacks became blacker, and the whites became whiter. In such a manner, Furs was led by Rionette Tinker through similar scenes that she had no way of getting her bearings right. It didn't take long before she arrived at the spot where there was a faint fog. In the depths of the fog, one eye after another seemed to look over, but they quickly shrank back. When Furs summoned Gehrman Sparrow's projection from the historical void to Backland, he had immediately entered the fog of history and dashed all the way to a period before the first epoch. His consciousness came alive within the projection, reducing Furs's spirituality expenditure. This way, Klein had indirectly returned to Backland. This was also the reason why he had gotten Miss Magician to use such a complicated method to summon the messenger. As for the messenger summoned by the adventurer's harmonica, it was an independent existence, it didn't increase the burden on Furs's spirituality burden. Even if the historical void projection vanished, Rionette Tinker could still remain in the real world if she so wished. After a teleportation, Klein's figure appeared in a secluded alley near St. Samuel Cathedral. He then used his faceless powers to change his appearance and figure. During this process, although there were still a few pedestrians in the alley, they were affected by an illusion. They didn't notice a sudden companion appearing beside them. Right on the heels of that, Klein straightened his clothes, pressed down on his hat, and walked quickly to St. Samuel Cathedral. He found a seat to the side of the main prayer hall and sat down. After taking off his hat and chanting an honorific name, he sincerely drew a crimson moon on his chest. Then, he clasped his hands together, closed his eyes, and prayed softly to the Evernight goddess. I'm currently searching for traces of the dark demonic wolf's past to grasp his exact condition. At this point, he recalled that the dark demonic wolf might have been a former colleague of the Evernight goddess. They likely knew plenty about each other, as he quickly added, I wonder if you can give me some hints. He didn't wait for a response. Instead, he maintained a calm attitude and continued, after this matter is completed, I plan on heading all the way east to see if I can reach the western continent and see what state that place is in. I'll take this opportunity to escape Amon's pursuit and find other possibilities. After praying, he tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion and whispered, Praise the Lady. Just as he finished speaking, a dark night sky with countless stars suddenly appeared in front of him. A message unknowingly appeared in his mind. It was information regarding Black Demonic Wolf, Kotar. Klein was stunned for a moment. Only when the starry sky before him completely disappeared did he return to his senses. He sincerely praised the goddess once again. After leaving St. Samuel Cathedral, he used Creeping Hunger and another teleportation to arrive near the Holy Wind Cathedral located in Sherwood Borough. He wanted to pray to the Lord of Storms. He looked up at the towering steeple and felt some momentary hesitation. He really wasn't sure if he should enter the headquarters of the Church of the Lord of Storms in Backland. I'm just a historical void projection. There's nothing to be afraid about. I won't suffer any losses from praying, but what if the Lord of Storms hears about the Amon situation and decides to bestow 0 to 32 to me? That way, I won't have to risk hunting the dark demonic wolf. A person should always be hopeful. After some thought, he finally made up his mind. He carefully raised his hand and summoned Anuni, the one who had yet to be parasitized by Amon, from the historical void to walk into the Holy Wind Cathedral in his own form. A minute or two later, a dark cloud suddenly appeared above Backlund. There seemed to be a flash of silver lightning in the Holy Wind Cathedral, but no one noticed it. Chapter 1189 Winter Gifts Day. As soon as the dark clouds in the sky dispersed, everything in the Holy Wind Cathedral returned to normal. In a nearby corner, Klein raised his hand to rub his forehead. The corners of his mouth twitched as he mumbled, "If you don't want to give it to me, so be it. But why did you kill my marionette?" He then took a deep breath before his figure rapidly faded away and disappeared. The time limit for maintaining the historical void projection was almost over. After all, a scribe's imitation of a high-level power had significant differences from the original version. The burden of a sequence 6 summoning a sequence 3 was rather heavy. Even if a scholar of Ur could transfer his consciousness over and reduce the spirituality expenditure, it was impossible for Furs to keep it up for too long. In the outskirts of Backlund, downstream of the Tussock River, Leonard hid his red gloves and slowly walked towards a certain spot. Suddenly, the slightly aged voice of Palaz Zoroast rang out in his mind. "How's your former colleague been doing recently?" Thinking back to the conversation at the Tarot Club, Leonard suppressed his voice and said, "He just avoided a trap set up by Amon's avatar. He's searching for the truth in the forsaken land of the gods." After listening to what he had to say, Palaz Zoroast didn't say another word and allowed Leonard to proceed forward. After setting up the special coordinates, Furs was thrown back into the real world by Gehrman Sparrow's messenger. "I feel exhausted, but I just woke up not too long ago. It must be that high sequence beyonder powers are too draining on my spirituality." Furs covered her mouth and yawned. She looked at Zio with a haggard expression. "That's possible." Zio agreed with her friend's judgment. Her intuition told her that the Gehrman Sparrow projection that had been summoned definitely wasn't simple. It could even be equivalent to a saint. After some hesitation, Zio said, "Sleep a little longer. Don't attempt to advance in such a state. In one of my previous trials, the murderer was mentally psychotic. He would deliberately make his friends, his students, and the tramps he took in, consume potions in all sorts of negative states, watch them lose control, and mutate into all kinds of monsters, disgusting and terrifying ones." What was this fellow's goal? Furs was stunned for a second. 2 goals. One was to observe whether the same potion caused the same loss of control on different people. The other was to use oil paintings to record the corresponding scenes. He believed that the madness, the pain, and the distortion had an unparalleled beauty, one that can stimulate his greatest creative passion. Zio recalled the trial from back then. She felt a sense of hatred and lingering fear. He was a complete lunatic. That fellow should be executed. Furs couldn't help but shudder when she imagined it. She bared her teeth and said, "Was he a cultist?" Perhaps, but there were no clues. On the surface, he appeared to be an outstanding artist, and he is very famous internationally. If it wasn't for more than 5 of his students and friends who had disappeared over the past few years, attracting our attention, then he might have had to wait until he completely went mad and lost control, becoming a monster, before this matter would be discovered. Zio suddenly paused for a moment before saying, "Back then, everyone in the law enforcement team that opened his hidden basement vomited. There were all kinds of mutated and terrifying corpses, and hanging overhead were all kinds of harrowing yet charming oil paintings. A hateful fellow, but it's also a very attractive story." Furs thought for a moment and pressed, "Was he a devil?" "No, he's a psychiatrist." Zio rejected her friend's guess. "You sentenced him to death?" Furs asked in anticipation. Zio shook her head. "His defense lawyer convinced me that he's more suited to be a sealed artifact researcher." "There's a lawyer? You have lawyers at the paranormal court? Isn't it all a direct trial?" Furs asked in surprise. Zio straightened her blonde hair and said, "There are some beyonders from the lawyer pathway among us who also need to act. Of course, they don't know that they're acting." "All right." Furs yawned again and pointed to the reclining chair beside the fireplace. "I'll sleep for a while." Don't you have work?" "We can take days off," Zio replied succinctly. Furs didn't ask further as she walked to the fireplace and collapsed into it. About 2 to 3 hours later, she woke up and cogitated for 15 minutes. Following that, she found the Traveler Beyonder characteristic and the supplementary ingredients given to her by her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham, and concocted a potion bottle. The potion's color was white but transparent. It was like half-melted snow water, occasionally producing light green bubbles. Furs held the potion and glanced at her friend who was on guard by the side. She smiled and said, "If I lose control, don't hesitate. Just chop off my head." "No, pray first. There might still be a chance to save me." Zio slowly nodded. "Maintain this state." Furs silently exhaled. Without any hesitation, she raised the bottle and gulped it down. In the blink of an eye, she felt her body and her eyes light up one after another. They blasted around her body and opened one illusory door after another. Furs's consciousness couldn't help but enter one of them. Her entire body turned transparent as she vanished. In such a chaotic state of mind, Furs nearly couldn't regain her sense of self-awareness. Thankfully, she had her fair share of being tormented recently and had a strong will. Furthermore, from time to time, she could feel the 4 special coordinates in the spirit world. Finally, she slowly came to her senses. After an unknown period of time, she realized that she had already entered the depths of the spirit world. It was difficult to tell her exact location, and she couldn't find her way back. With the help of the 4 special coordinates, Furs slowly traversed back to a familiar spot, leaving the saturated, stacked colors and a thin fog before walking out of the spirit world. The 4 special coordinates weren't only used to help me find a way back, they can also effectively maintain my self-awareness. Teacher is only a sequence 7, so without any actual experience, it's inevitable for him to miss out on such knowledge. As Furs thought, she cast her gaze toward Zio and smiled slightly. "I'm a traveler." Zio heaved a sigh of relief and asked curiously, "What new Beyonder powers did you get?" "The main one is teleportation. Also, invisible hand. In addition, the number of demigod-level Beyonder powers I can record has increased to 4. The actual effects should be close to that of a sequence 4, Furs examined herself. She then raised her hand and pulled out a tarot card from across the room, one used for divination. It was a person with a scepter in his right hand that pointed towards the sky. His left hand pointed to the earth. In front of him were people like the Holy Grail, a scepter, a sword, star coins, the magician card. Every year's longest night was the birthday of the Evernight goddess, commonly known as the Winter Gifts Day. On this day, all Evernight believers would head to a nearby cathedral to witness the sunset of the sun. When night fell, they would participate in Mass, enjoy a holy meal, listen to the hymns, and do all sorts of activities. The year 1350 for Lone's Evernight believers was a very heavy year. The intensity of the war and the cost of items had made them lose the good mood they had. However, on Winter Gifts Day, they still came out of their houses. This was because the Church of Evernight was going to hold a massive Mass in the various large public squares to placate the souls that had passed away. At the same time, many foundations would distribute food vouchers at the Massachusetts. People who received them could be able to obtain the corresponding items in any of the relief points or cathedrals. This led to Storm and Steam believers who didn't celebrate Winter Gifts Day to head for the nearest square. Westboro, Memorial Square, where George III was blasted to death. Dressed in a black cloak while walking her golden retriever, Susie, with a leather bag on her back, Audrey walked among the nobles looking refined. Her expression didn't seem abnormal, but she hid some pain and guilt. She had obtained the blood of an elderly mind dragon. After concocting the manipulator potion, she placed it in the small bag Susie was carrying. Susie was already a Sequence 6 hypnotist. She believed that not many people present would notice her abnormality and snatch things from her. The blood of the elderly mind dragon came from the hermit Catlia. Apparently, she had obtained it from Queen Mystic, and she had paid £3,000 for it. This was in line with her expectations, as she didn't really want to obtain the ingredients from the psychology alchemists. After all, her direct superior, Vin Rambus, had only died a few months ago. To collect the items needed for an advancement, it made it inevitable for people to suspect her. As for the other members of the psychology alchemists, they had the ability and intelligence to notice this point. Besides, after becoming a demigod, one has to come into contact with the psychology alchemists' counselors. According to Mr. World, there might be an angel from the mind domain hidden amongst them. I'll continue making preparations. With a suitable opportunity and excuse, I'll consider raising my position in the organization. I'll hide my strength for now. The blonde Audrey lifted the ends of her skirt slightly and slowly walked towards her predetermined spot. Along the way, many nobles extended their hands to her in a friendly manner, hoping to help this beautiful, noble, and weak young lady through the crowd. However, these were all blocked by Earl Hall. He got his eldest son, Hibbert, to be in charge of his youngest daughter while he held his wife's arm and walked ahead. From time to time, he would turn back to look at the most dazzling jewel of Backlund. Not long after their family arrived at their destination, the Church of Evernight's Bishop of the Backlund Diocese, St. Anthony Stevens, walked up to the high platform in his black robe with red patterns. He looked around, raised his right hand, and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Praise the Lady. When the believers below responded, this saint's deep voice could be heard by everyone. Today is the celebration of the night, but the goddess's response is pity. She takes pity on every mother who has lost her child. She takes pity on every lonely child. And she takes pity on everyone who has suffered immense pain. She said that all of this will end. All the suffering will return to silence and repose. Chapter 1190 Resonance. As Anthony Stephen Vincent's words echoed in Memorial Square, it spread to other areas. The Loanese citizens who participated in the Mass were both moved and sad, feeling warmth in the midst of their depression. In a different square, different choirs began to chant the hymns. The ethereal and holy voice seemed to echo deep in everyone's heart. Full-faced above the land stood the crimson moon, and sweet it was to dream of themselves, of child, and wife, and parents, but evermore, unknowingly, everyone felt their spirits being cleansed and their spirituality naturally released. They seemed to have entered a dream and were strolling in a quiet darkness. Their children were sleeping here. Their parents, their wives, their husbands, their friends, and the deceased were no longer suffering. They no longer had any pain, their expressions were peaceful and gentle. We look upward into the night sky, we tenderly say her name, Evernight Goddess. If she heard us, she would surely agree, smiling with purity at the dead. Come, rest and sleep well, my children, too. The people who were strolling in the dream felt awash with intense sorrow once again, as though they realized that they were really going to bid each other farewell. They recalled all the beautiful memories from the past. They recalled the scene of their family enjoying delicacies and having fun at the dining table. They recalled the people who looked at them warmly, and the pain of seeing them get hurt. When they learned of their passing, it was as if they could tear their souls apart. They recalled the dark clouds and separation that had been brought to this war. They were sleeping peacefully in this serene nation, no longer having any worries. However, the people who survived had to suffer the days and nights, turning haggard and withered. One teardrop after another flowed down. The people participating in Mass at Memorial Square could no longer suppress their emotions as they silently released the pain they had accumulated. A huge wave of sadness filled the air, mixed with the chanting of the choir, as though it had a corporeal form. Cross your hands humbly, over your breast. Make the silent prayer, and shout from the bottom of your heart, the only escape is tranquility. 3. The people who were sobbing silently with their eyes closed subconsciously followed the content of the hymns and made similar gestures. Then, they shouted in their hearts, infected with each other's emotions, the only escape is tranquility. The grief reached an apex with more than 10,000 hearts resonating at Memorial Square. At this moment, Audrey opened her eyes and bent down. She took out a bottle of potion from the leather pouch that her golden retriever, Susie, was carrying. There were countless points of light floating in the potion, just like the manifestation of the sea of collective subconscious. Audrey didn't hesitate. Under such circumstances, she removed the bottle cap and gulped down the liquid inside. Unlike in the past where she could experience the potion slush through her throat and into her stomach, she immediately felt abnormal. She felt that she could no longer sense her body. Her entire being seemed to have condensed into an idea as she merged into the illusory sea around her. This was her first time directly seeing the sea of collective subconscious without passing through a dream or mind island. As though she had returned to her mother's embrace before she was born, she returned to the very beginning where the imprints left by human ancestors were washed away by the tides as they crumbled and were influenced. There was fear, madness, and all kinds of terrifying mental corruption. For a moment, Audrey found it difficult to resist. Her consciousness faded, and her body shook as though it was on the brink of melting away. However, the sea nearby wasn't serene. There was a certain degree of undulations, spreading the intense sorrow and pain around. Under such influence, the self-aware Audrey, who was about to be assimilated by the sea of collective subconscious, also began to resonate, generating uncontrollable feelings of grief within her. The grief spread from one thought to another. Soon, it filled the blob of thoughts that Audrey had mutated into. It pierced through her soul body and pierced her soul. Audrey finally regained a little of her senses. She skillfully placated herself, constantly giving cues to remove the corruption until she regained her senses. The voice in her ears became clearer and clearer, louder and louder. Finally, it reverberated through the sea of collective subconscious. The only escape is tranquility. The only escape is tranquility. The only escape is tranquility. Audrey repeated the prayer as her figure quickly turned clear. With a mere thought, she split herself into many transparent and illusory bodies. She traveled through the sea of collective subconscious and reached the mind islands that represented different people and stepped onto them. In these places, she could clearly see the sadness coming from different people. The bombshells that came from the sky, the airship that made up a fleet, the letters spelling bad news sent from the front lines, blood and flesh splattering in front of them, and the person who they loved suddenly collapsing in front of them, the pile of toys that no longer had an owner, the fit of coughs that came from the great smog, the only escape is tranquility. The golden retriever, Susie, also shut her eyes in Massachusetts. She used the human language to recite those words in her heart, but she failed to notice any changes in her surroundings. Suddenly, in her soul, in her body of heart and mind, Audrey's voice sounded, "Susie, I succeeded. I've always been worried that I'll become more and more indifferent as my sequence increases due to the potion's effects, that I'll become more and more like a mythical creature instead of a human." Susie raised her head in confusion and saw that although the blonde girl's eyes were tightly shut, tears had unknowingly covered her face. Then, she heard Audrey say in her heart, "Thankfully, I can still feel their sorrow." How nice. In Susie's eyes, teardrops fell from the corner of the blonde girl's eyes. It was crystal clear. At this moment, the sun's final ray of light was swallowed. The night brought about tranquility. Everyone opened their eyes and said in a calm voice, "The only escape is tranquility." After crying without restraint, the bright, cheerful Audrey's mood became heavy. She became a little sensitive and a little sad. It made everyone who saw her feel a sense of love from the bottom of their hearts. Under all kinds of protection, she returned to Empress Borough and returned to her room. Only then did she have the chance to seriously examine herself and digest the knowledge and experience she gained from the sea of collective subconscious. Others might not be able to tell, but Audrey knew very well that the tall, blonde, blue-eyed beauty in the mirror already possessed extraordinary strength and exaggerated dragon-scale defenses. She could break through a block of steel with one punch. Oh, I can still use dragon transformation. It's equivalent to using an incomplete mythical creature form. However, I have to wait until I get used to the potion and keep stacking up the correct psychological cues. Otherwise, I can lose control. Every dragon transformation can't exceed a certain amount of time. Otherwise, even if I have the means to treat my mind and soul, I'll be contaminated by madness and confusion, causing me to lose control. My current limit is about a minute. The core power of a manipulator is manipulation. I can allow a body of heart and mind pass through the sea of collective subconscious and enter another person's mind island. I can directly change their subconscious and read their thoughts, silently driving them to do all sorts of things. Matching manipulation is virtual persona. I can create many personas, allowing them to have a corresponding body of heart and mind. This aspect can resist a lot of influence in the mind domain, and on the other hand, it can allow me to use them to silently invade the target's island of consciousness without any signs of it. I currently can have only 13 virtual personas. A manipulator can also create a terrifying mental plague. By using the sea of collective subconscious, I can spread all kinds of mental illnesses and extreme madness. Yes, awe has turned into mind deprivation, a huge area of effect version. It's no longer just the single effect of awe. I can also transform my designated thoughts into a mind storm that will sweep the surroundings, affecting all my enemies. As a manipulator, it naturally comes with the ability to travel the sea of collective subconscious. It's called consciousness stroll. Otherwise my target would have long left by the time I arrived at a location after a series of complicated manipulations. Audrey looked at herself in the mirror and suddenly revealed a faint smile. Then, she puffed up her cheeks and opened her mouth as if she was about to spew something. Since her mythical creature form was a mind dragon, it definitely had to have some form of dragon's breath. This was an attack that could directly stimulate and harm the target's body of heart and mind and soul body. It dealt damage in an area of effect manner, an upgraded version of psychic piercing. Following that, Audrey's green eyes turned slightly and she looked away. She sighed inwardly. This is what it means to be a demigod. These powers make even me feel afraid. How powerful is Mr. World for him to be able to kill Vin Rambus, in the ancient palace above the fog? As the participants of the hunting operation made their preparations, they decided to organize a private gathering to discuss the details. A manipulator is that terrifying? The magician Furs looked at Miss Justice beside her and blurted out in shock. Just now, Audrey had briefly mentioned the changes she had undergone after becoming a demigod. Although she didn't elaborate in detail to protect her trump cards, it still left the magician, the hermit, Judgment, and the star in shock. Actually, it's not that terrifying. Mr. World knows very well. Audrey cast her gaze to the bottom of the long, model table. The World Gehrman Sparrow didn't nod as he tersely acknowledged. I also had powerful helpers before I could kill Vin Rambus. He paused and said, before discussing the hunting operation, I would like to know how to make the Abraham family sense my friendliness. 1. Adapted from The Lotus Eaters by Tennyson. 2. Adapted from The Cry of the Children by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. 3. Adapted from The Bridge of Sighs by Thomas Hood and Lotus Eaters by Tennyson.